Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed, a pleasure for me to be moderating this session on a very interesting topic. And at the outset, I also would like to give my, hearty congratulations to Users Foundation for having come up with this very interesting two-day event on the security dialogue, getting to discuss quite a few gamut of issues pertaining to security, particularly traditional security as well as non-traditional security aspects of international security. And at the same time, I also would like to commend my friend Abhinav, the CEO of Users Foundation, for having able to pull up this event very successfully, and also an event of this magnitude in a very short span of time since the inception of this foundation a couple of years ago. I personally feel very honored and privileged to be moderating this session on a topic or a session titled How to Rehabilitate a Terrorist. And this is something all of us, when we talk about terrorism and aspects of terrorism or counterterrorism, we tend to focus more on the kinetic approaches of fighting all forms of terrorism or violent extremism. At least, to my understanding, particularly in our country, less is discussed about the rehabilitation part of the terrorists or any elements or any personalities related with terrorism or any of these anti-state activities in the country. So for the purpose of this session, we have a very eminent speaker who would take us through this session on the topic how to rehabilitate a terrorist. Before we begin with the session, I would like to introduce the speaker of this session, Dr. Malkanthi Hettiarachchi, who is also a chartered clinical psychologist and a counterterrorism researcher and instructor. She completed her PhD she completed a PhD in policing intelligence and counterterrorism at the Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia. She has studied attack profiles and conducted interviews and assessments with violent extremist offenders in detention and rehabilitation facilities. And some of these countries are very, very fascinating countries. They are Philippines, Indonesia, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Libya, and South America. Dr. Mal also provides training and supervision for military, police, prison, and rehabilitation staff on rehabilitation program design, prison management, de-radicalization, and psychological skills. Dr. Mal conducts psychometric testing, profiling, and de-radicalization with terrorist detainees, inmates. She has presented on terrorist rehabilitation at conferences and workshops in countries including Spain, Italy, Malta, Germany, Belgium, The Hague, Tajikistan, Kosovo, Montenegro, Tunisia, Algeria, Oman, Abu Dhabi, Kenya, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Hawaii. Dr. Mal has published in the field of rehabilitation and reintegration, radicalization, de-radicalization, re-radicalization, and on terrorist mindset. So we have a speaker who has come with a voluminous experiences in dealing with this very international or global phenomenon, terrorism. And some of these countries, if we have seen in the recent times, particularly in the last, say, 7 to 8 years period, we have seen quite a bit of activities in almost all these countries, thanks to the tentacles spread by global terrorist organizations like ISIS that reinforce the phenomenon of radicalization. Carry out attacks.
Share my PowerPoint. Do I just press the share button?
Akshay, could you just come in this? I'm sure that would be the way out.
Okay, let me
Could you repeat that? I didn't get that. Sorry.
Dr. Mall wants to share her PPT or a presentation. Yeah, I think we can see it.
All right.
Yes.
The
Yes.
option is right there, I mean.
Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Alvite, for that very kind introduction. I think you already heard from a psychologist, Dr. Adil, before. So it was good to hear a lot of the presentations this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, a good afternoon to you. The transformation of a civilian into a terrorist is multifaceted and requires a multi-pronged 360-degree response. Now, for us to reverse this process, we need to engage in the 360-degree process because for us, it is a matter of national security. Rehabilitation is a matter of national security because every individual who doesn't go through a process of rehab and goes back into community when their incarceration time is done continues to be a risk to society. So we take this approach, 360-degree approach, to reverse the process of radicalization. So de-radicalization is about reversing the process of radicalization. So it's important that we remember that nobody is born a terrorist. It is our own civilians that are recruited from our own communities and neighborhoods, groomed into terrorism, that return to attack our own countries or other countries or in other venues. And we also must remember that the recruitment base and the community from which terrorists are recruited are not necessarily homogeneous. So if we are referring to the LTT and the Tamil community, not everybody supports terrorism. And if we look at the Muslim community in Sri Lanka, not everybody supports the IS. So it's important for us as a community and people working to create harmony, that we remember that it is a small, virulent group that will engage in this kind of techniques. It is a method. Terrorism is a method of getting whatever they want politically. So the grooming process is also multifaceted. So terrorists take a very multifaceted approach to recruit and to groom and to sustain and to mobilize. So if they are using a multi-pronged, multifaceted 360-degree approach, we need to use a similar approach to bring the people back and to reverse the process of radicalization. So it requires a very coordinated effort. So the state has to be part of it. The security system is part of it. The community social organizations, the CSOs are a part of it, and the general civilian population needs to be part of it in this response to terrorism. I believe that when a terrorist or a rebel is captured or is forced to surrender, we have what I refer to as a golden opportunity. Perhaps it is the only opportunity to start the de-radicalization process. How we handle this individual every step of the way determines the progress that we make in de-radicalization. The detainee, we must remember, in rehabilitation is resistant, resentful, angry, frightened, uncertain, and detainees, some will watch and wait to see what will happen to them at the hands of their enemy, which is the state. This is a decisive time when we begin in rehab the battle for hearts and minds. I know that this term is used a lot, bandied around a lot, but it is finally a battle for hearts and minds, because we must remember that originally this terrorist was a civilian, belonged to a community, and was somehow recruited and groomed into terrorism because something within that person resonated with what the terrorists are proposing and suggesting. So their ideology that is proposed and the charismatic individuals who are propagating it, the social media, all this combined together to change my mind to become a terrorist. And it gives me adequate justification, moral justification for me to join a group and then to go down that staircase of radicalization and to finally engage in conducting an attack. Dr. Alvite, are you able to see my presentation, the PowerPoint? You can see my PowerPoint? Yes, okay. So I also want to say that there are several models for rehabilitation that exist in countries like Singapore, Sri Lanka, of course, and Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and several other countries. These models exist because I believe every country needs to study their population of terrorists or violent extremist offenders, whatever you wish to call them. And they need to study their ideologies, motivations, grievances, the desire to be exclusive. All that has to be studied, and each solution should come from each country. So there is no one size fits all. But there are some guiding principles and good practices that all these countries can follow. And one of them, I would say, is assessment, and also the way we set our rehabilitation programs up to manage the difficulties that we are faced with today. The radicalization in itself, I mean, it is to become extreme. I believe that when we use the word radicalization, it is to become extreme, and I can be an extreme sports person, or I can be extreme in the violence or aggression that I am thinking of. The focus here is radicalization into violence. So we need to remember that we are talking about radicalization that happens by so-called harmless groups that propose violence but don't do violence, but they create the recruitment base for violent organizations to recruit from them. So I do not believe, like some of the previous speakers said, they don't do violence, but they only radicalize, because they are essentially preparing a beautiful base for other violent groups to recruit from and mobilize these people into violence. Over time, we need to remember that it leads to significant alterations in worldview. So when we radicalize somebody, when a terrorist group radicalizes, starts their radicalization progress, they alter the way our community, our civilians begin to think. And they alter the perception of events. They would give a different slant and interpret events in a particular way that helps to lead the person towards their violent agenda. Initially, it might not be a violent agenda, but for justice, or have all these human rights or justice focus. But the group manages to harness that desire for justice into violence. So over time, radicalization significantly alters the worldview, perception of events, and our internal understanding of them. And these changes are reflected in our behavior and ultimately escalates to a point of engaging in violence. So groups that propagate violence but don't do violence, radicalizes people but don't mobilize, are groups that just prepare a beautiful base for violent groups to recruit from. De-radicalization is about reversing the process of violence and process of violent extremist beliefs, actions, and returning the person to moderation and inclusivity. If we look at the LTT that was in Sri Lanka for 30 odd years, their narrative was very much based on grievances and massaging that narrative, developing that narrative to justify violence. If you look at IS factor, it is largely about exclusivity, wanting a caliphate, wanting a separate space. So it's about exclusivism. They do not want to mix with other communities because they want exclusivity. We don't want our religion, our ethnic group, or anything to be contaminated. So it's about exclusivity. So it is not about integration. I think we need to remember that some of these things are quite different. Rehabilitation is an activity that we adopt to facilitate returning the beneficiary to moderation and inclusivity. And re-radicalization happens when the beneficiary once again turns to violent extremist beliefs and actions. So rehabilitation is not a one-off thing. And it is not permanent. We have to continue to engage, continue to work with individuals who have been recruited into violence, who has been part of the violence, felt significance within this violent group, felt important, was cared for within this group morally, felt that they belonged. We bring this person out of that. We have to re-engage the person in a similar set of significance gaining activities, meaningfulness in life, and to become a peace builder and to have a lot of meaning in being a peace builder. Because the thrill that a terrorist has got from being engaged and entrenched in violence, that thrill is muscle memory. It's within. And that cannot ever be got by mainstreaming a person who does a 9-to-5 job and is peace and harmony. That excitement is there for a long time. So ideologically, the individual needs to be very clearly de-radicalized if the person is to continue to be an ordinary civilian in the community. So that is why we have a lot of re-radicalization. So there was a question on where is ideology in this whole thing. So this is a little model that has been put together, and Professor Arik Kruglanski, who's an eminent social psychologist, has put this model together, and I've used this, and it applies to every single terrorist population that I have worked with, from the Philippines to Indonesia to Sri Lanka to Latin America's MRT and Sandro Luminoso. So if you look, each group, each individual has a perceived grievance, and they have a person to blame for that grievance. Without that blaming for the grievance, there's nobody for me to target with the method of violence. So every single individual and group has these three components. Whether it's Al-Qaeda, IS, LTT, or any other group, they have it. There's a grievance. This is being done to us. These people are to be blamed. And this is the method, only method that we can use is violence. So this is where we have to break in. There's no country without grievances, no community that doesn't experience grievances. Yes, there will be people to blame, but is our method going to be violence? That is the space where we can actually shift this whole ideologically based violence. Is that the only method that we have? Painful or not, we have other methods to redress grievances. Otherwise, most of the globe would be resorting to violence. This is a model that I have put together to counter, manage, and inoculate. So uphill is countering radicalization. So to counter radicalization, it can be a kinetic approach, it can be a social media approach, it is countering. So as it is happening, we are countering it. At the apex, terrorism has happened. Downhill is the management and rehabilitation. And the biggest, broadest base is community resilience building and inoculation. I think governments have to put a massive amount of funding into community resilience building and inoculation to prevent it even before it begins. I think one of the countries that does it best I have seen is Singapore. Huge amount of community resilience building programs. I think Dr. Jolene Gerard will speak about it later. Uphill countering radicalization is not my topic for today. That is more to do with the previous sessions. Downhill management and rehabilitation is my topic. And within that, we have rehabilitation, which is a specialized intervention because we need to de-radicalize and we need to sustain the changes because all that effort is going to be wasted if we don't sustain the changes. Then following rehabilitation, we have reintegration. And then we have the aftercare and ongoing. So is there one-off rehabilitation? No. Rehabilitation, reintegration and aftercare is ongoing and it is a lifetime. It is not easy. Otherwise, you will have re-radicalization. So this is the model we put in place with the LTT because today we have 12,189 odd former LTT members, which includes suicide bombers who were trained to be suicide bombers in the community. And we haven't had an attack by individuals still or joining for any of the subsequent incidences from the rehabilitation program. Those who have gone through the full rehabilitation program. We need to remember that counter-radicalization is there and de-radicalization is there. And for us, the interest is de-radicalization. Within Sri Lanka, we adopted this 6+1 pronged model. Other countries have more components, some countries have less. So we have a community arm. We also have education, professional, vocational training, the religious rehab. We have sports, extracurricular, psychological and creative therapies, social, cultural, and family. I want you to think we have all this in our civilian lives. All this was manipulated by the terrorists to make a person into a terrorist. So what we do in the rehab program is putting it back, bearing in mind the ideological components, and by assessing, remembering that we have to do assessment. So does everybody get the same kind of input? No, there is low, intermediate, high levels of intervention. So how do we know that a person has low, intermediate, high levels of intervention? Because we have to assess. There's no rehab program that can function without assessment. So this is a standard assessment process that we use, which is interview, observation, information assessment, and formal actuarial assessments like the de-radicalization assessments and violence risk assessments. So I won't go through all this in detail because I have only 20 minutes. But some of the assessments I've listed here that we have conducted, radicalization assessment, that was largely my area. We have the mental health assessment, socioeconomic survey that was done by IOM, educational assessment, vocational training assessments, risk assessments, and the security assessments that were done by the security sector. So a few of the programs, according to my 6+1 model, that we engaged all the beneficiaries in these programs. We didn't engage all the beneficiaries in all the programs, but they had to go through at these programs and select the programs that they wanted to do a vocational training course in. And each person had to have at least one. Many had engaged in so many different types of vocations, but they had to have at least one. So we need to, in rehab, as psychologists, we need to identify the push and the pull factors. So what are the factors that will push people towards radicalization in our beneficiary group and pull people towards radicalization? I use the word beneficiary because once a terrorist comes into a rehab program, we do not want to give the identity of a terrorist because that person is willing to start a new life willingly or unwillingly. So then we refer to the person as the beneficiary of the rehab program. And this term is used within the rehab even after. What do we do within rehab? We look at reducing their vulnerability and increasing their resilience. So reducing their vulnerability to radicalization, radical ideologies, and increased resilience. Do we do this alone? No. We have to have a large amount of partnerships. But these partnerships, they all need to have one goal: to help the beneficiary to become a moderate citizen and re-engage in the community. So we can't have people here pulling in different directions. So the only focus is put the person back in the community as a safe citizen. The president at the time said, I do not want 12,500 terrorist prisoners. I want civilians. Give me back citizens and civilians. That was the beginning of our rehab program, which makes sense. Prisons are overcrowded. Do we want more terrorists in our prisons? No, we don't. They will anyway come out. And do we want them to remain to be radical or even further radicalized in prisons? No, we don't. So have rehab programs, work day and night, get people to shift by winning their hearts and minds, and they will help you. Your terrorist population will tell you the ideological problems that they have and where it can be broken into. So we look at grievances, we need to look at policies, we need to look at ideology, emotional well-being, and exclusivism and exclusion issues. Aspects that we explore in the grooming process: significance. Where did this person get the significance from? What were the moral justifications for violence? What were the grievance narratives that helped them to be drawn into a terrorist group? What was the cognitive dissonance? Many people say, oh, that suicide-trained bomber was a very soft, kind boy. Then what was the dissonance that happened in his mind for him to shift into going and detonating and killing civilians? We use a method called Socratic questioning, where we help the person to rethink and reevaluate, and self-efficacy. That is, I felt valued in a terrorist group. How is this person going to feel valued outside of a terrorist group? We also need to be aware of early warning signs, EWS. How do families know their child is going towards becoming radical or extremist? Expressed opinions, the material that is seen, the behavioral changes, look at the range of perceived grievances the person is expressing, identity crisis, exposure to ideology and ideologues, personal history, what are the mosques that they are visiting, which they didn't do before. So these are all early warning signs that every family needs to be aware of if they are going to protect their loved one. Because some parents have said, how do I counter when my child comes and says this? I don't have the vocabulary. I don't have the statements to counter. I know it is wrong, but I don't know how to counter. So any successful intervention, I would say, has common themes. There has to be a good therapeutic relationship based on trust, intellectual, cultural, and emotional approach. There should be learning. We should be able to come to a level to look at the challenge and narratives, look and support people to unlearn some of what they have learned, look at what their memories are that are pulling them back into radicalization, look at their institutional dependence and re-socialization. It's important to have family engagement, personal qualities of the practitioner that facilitates the rehab, rejecting past behaviors without rejecting the person, ability to exit thinking and ideology and the group they were committed to with dignity, and continue to change with having some continuity. So I believe that these components are important, and these are some of the risk assessment areas that we have looked at in rehabilitation. We look at the past, the present, and the future. I know I have run out of time, but if we are looking at the outcomes, we would look at the likelihood of offending, again, the potential to harm others, related vulnerability to their own behavior through the omissions or actions of others, and protective factors. In rehab, protective factors is what we strengthen a lot. Because if we look at what is it that the person had before they joined a terrorist group, they had a lot. And we want to emphasize that part. If we are to prevent recidivism, I think we need to have the security approach. We need to have the social media and platforms and countering approach. We need to have the rehabilitation approach. We need to have the community resilience building approach. And rehabilitation program people cannot just do rehab. They have to do rehab, reintegration, and aftercare. So these are components that are required. And these are some of the books that speak about rehab and will be of much value to some of your audience. And it would be good if people can look at theory and practice together, because there are a lot of people with actual ground level experience, and there are a lot of people with theory, and theory comes out of practice. So I would like to leave it there, but let me tell you that moving our communities towards community engagement and doing the rehab, because when we do the rehab, they will enter into the community again. So I believe that that bottom community engagement phase has to be really solid, and a lot of money has to be put into that while the countering part is also managed. So rehab is not one-off, it's an ongoing process. And it was a pleasure talking to you all. I shall leave you there because I have run out of time significantly.
Dr. Alvite, I have a question for Dr. Malkanthi. Can you hear me, Dr. Alvite?
I can hear you.
Okay. Ma'am, thank you very much, ma'am, for this excellent presentation. This topic of radicalization, de-radicalization is very dear to me because I have worked, especially in Kashmir, on militancy and radicalization over the last 3-4 years. And I would just like to share some of my observations first, and then I have a question. So, like in Kashmir in particular, I found that, people joining a terrorist group was, always a result of a factor which was more than radicalization. I would say like it was not just radicalization. Like I had experiences, interactions with some of the hardcore Jaish-e-Mohammed militants, and in their personal lifestyle, they followed a very Devbandi, the doctrinaire of Islam, and although they were following the same school which Taliban does, but those Jaish terrorists, in their personal life, they were having 2 to 3 girlfriends, and they would be smoking, and they were even dating some of the married females. And some of them left, not exactly left militancy, but some of them actually became police informers just because they had their stakes. Like they were dating a female, and they wanted some kind of a respite from the security forces side. And they actually started working. So that was one case. And then normally in a case of an individual being radicalized, we observe that he tends to get dissociated from the family. But in Kashmir, if you see, in most of the encounters, like when a militant is trapped in the cordon and search operation by security forces, right after that, he makes a call to his family, and they talk to their mothers, and then they say that, well, we are ready for the Jannat, we are ready for this martyrdom, okay, and we wanted to do a lot for your family. And this, initially their mothers would cry that, my son, beta, humne mana kaha tha, we told you not to go towards this path, this is not good, this is not. But then finally, after some time, their mothers would say, no, finally you have chosen this path, all our blessings with you, and may you get Jannat later. And then those chaps will die. So this was, even the people, and especially some groups follow a very distinct technique of radicalization, like Jaish. Jaish is expert in producing suicide bombers. So they have a very unique technique of radicalizing. They would get someone who is very vulnerable, impressionable, and they know that in Kashmiri society, in general, the society is very liberal. Like, it's like people don't follow, by natural disposition, they are not towards that radical Islamic practices. People drink, people have affairs, everything. So they get someone who is very vulnerable, someone who has been beaten by security forces, or someone with like some stupid grievance. Then that person is brought and he is subjected to very rigorous, some kind of a very overwhelming radicalization discourse, lectures for about a few months. And after that, and he is not exposed to anything else. He's just subjected to those very rigorous lectures of mostly Masood Azhar and his company. And then he is straight away sent to the mission. And then he commits the mission and finally he dies. And this is the case with the militants. But those people who are actually radicalized in ideological terms, they mostly play the role of intellectual, I would say leadership, providing the leadership in Jamaat-e-Islami or the Islamist organizations. They are radicalized in very mental sort of a way, I would say. They may not join militancy. They have their families very well adjusted, their sons and daughters working in government services, even in some foreign countries. But they take the leadership and they actually just, radicalize people, mobilize people to this whole thing. Okay? So these were my observations. Okay? But then I would say, like, when in another cases, some people who come back from militancy, who surrender, or like, or if they then they go back to that old militant group because of the peer pressure, or because they are not able to find a suitable job in the society doesn't accept them, and they develop a comfort zone with their old group of militants. So that vintage circle still keeps contacts with them, which includes mostly OGWs, overground workers. So they feel that, okay, well, we are fine with you. What are you doing there? You're not getting any job. This life was much better. There, you're getting abused by your family. You're not doing anything, So come back. So that continuous interaction with that old militant logistics network circle brings them back. So these are very unique things. But in general, given these differences, do you think that we can have a concept of a national or a state level radicalization index? This is something which I discussed at length in my book, Radicalization in India and Exploration, the idea of national radicalization index, where we come out with a set of indicators and then use them to develop into a statistical tool to study radicalization trends at a district level or at a county level. And those trends may include behavioral patterns, the money that comes for the local mosque building, people coming under the influence of foreign ideologies like Salafism, Wahhabism, etc. Sorry for my long discourse. I'm really sorry, but I would like to know your thoughts.
You spoke about they dissociate with family and then yet they go back to family. Now, this is something that we see a lot. Everything that you have said is so accurate, because if it is accurate for you, that means, in my experience, what I've seen in all these countries, it is just the same. Not everybody has the hardcore ideology, but we need to remember that if I am leading the group, if I'm a charismatic leader leading a terrorist group, I will recruit people for various reasons. I will recruit the vulnerable person who is vulnerable emotionally, doesn't necessarily critically think, but will follow somebody who gives them a bit more attention. I will recruit the person who has gone through some abuse. I will recruit the person who is getting online radicalized and reading a lot of material and is getting self-radicalized. I will recruit a whole gamut of individuals. They are not homogeneous. They come for various reasons. One of the aspects that I found is none of these people actually understand a lot about Islam, but they all have some kind of thinking process that hooks them up to the organization. There are people who will join, and when it comes to a crunch, they will remember the family. So they will cry, they will speak to the mother. The mother will try to get them away. But when she engages the son or the daughter, they will speak about their perspective. And the mother will begin to see that perspective. And then she will think, yes, you don't have any other option. So we have had that. We have had also parents who have said no. In the Easter Sunday attack here, there was one parent who actually found that his son was involved. and called the police and said, he is here. I sacrificed my entire career to bring him up. If he has helped to kill 300 odd individuals in the Easter bombing, I don't want him here. He has to be punished. So the father handed him over to the police. So there are, and again, all families and parents are not the same. So this is why there are lots of women's groups in Europe and other regions. I know Edith Schaeffer is running a group. So they engage with other mothers. They look at how they can manage this. There are some, even with the LTT, there are some on YouTube, you can find how some parents supported their child to be a suicide bomber. So this is why we need the early warning signs. Families need to know this is where my child is shifting to, so that they can do something early about it to bring them back. Then we need to have the community policing team that can be engaged but won't rush in and arrest. Because even a family that has a extremely radical individual doesn't want to give up their child. Not everybody will be like the other parent who was strong enough to say, I don't want any part of this. So we need to have the community policing needs to be there. The women and children's desks that are set up in Sri Lanka is part of it. And these families have to have a place to go when they see the early warning signs. They need to have the support groups. On the other hand, we also need to remember that you said, why are these people again going back? There's something called significance. I feel significance loss. So again, if I look at Arif Bruglansky, he speaks about significance loss. If I keep telling you, you are not a valuable person anymore, your community is not valuable, you all are being trampled, these people are doing this to you. If I do that over time, you will begin to lose significance and importance and have a sense of loss. Then you will look at redressing it. Then you would look at seeing who can cater to my need. And then you have people joining some of these groups. There was also another question on why rebels of one group will go and join another group. If you look at Kosovo went through a rebellious period. And then if you look at Syria and Iraq, one of the large numbers of Europeans that went and joined Syria and Iraq was from Kosovo, because they were used to the fighting. So they went and joined another rebel movement. In Indonesia, I remember meeting one of the detainees in Surabaya, where I was doing some of the assessments. In that particular place, he has gone and leaned against every possible group that you can think of, rebel group. So I asked him, why do you go and join all these different rebel groups and fight? He said, because I'm fighting for justice. So he goes and aligns himself with all the different rebel groups. But did I buy that about justice? No, I didn't buy it, because that is his way of rationalizing, morally rationalizing what he has done. So when we look at this issue, we have to look at it holistically, because people can be recruited from different bases and they join for various reasons. That is why I said every country needs to have assessed their populations and look at the terrorist groups that they are planning to join and see what can be put in place within all your local communities. And you had to build it up from that. I don't know whether I answered your question, but you had a lot of different aspects to your question.
Thank you very much. So you did. Thank you. You came out of it with a very scientific explanation to this whole process of radicalization and de-radicalization. And I mean, certainly it has to be developed into a very systematic policy tool. That's all I can say. Thank you.
It looks like a mountain. It looks huge. But if you actually break it down to small pieces, everybody instead of waiting for governments, can start something in their own little town that will create inclusivity and harmony. And if that cascades through India, through Pakistan, through different, I'm not very sure of the landscape, but if every town and community and ward starts this, then it will have an effect, especially starting with the community. And while the security is doing their part of it, rehab people have to do their part of it. I noticed a question, rehab is like bolting the door after the horses, locking the door after the horses bolted. Everybody can do everything. My segment in this is rehab. So that's all I'm going to talk about. The security guys have to do their part. Governments and policies have to do their part. The international community has to network and do their intelligence work. And the community has to do their part. So I think if we all broke it down into bite-sized pieces and looked at who can do what, but come together as a whole, well coordinated, then it will be a success. So why in Sri Lanka do we think it was a success? Because it was assessed from day one. There was a separate bureau for rehabilitation, reintegration and aftercare. Nothing else, just rehab, reintegration, aftercare, and they follow up. We are 12 years down from the LTT once the fighting finished, but still it continues. So it is doable.
Abhinav, do we have more time for discussion or?
I think I'll request Dr. Malkanthi just to take one more question of her choice. After that, we have to start the next session.
Right.
Dr. Jolene is already here.
Yeah, I think most of the I think these are in the form of comments only that we are seeing, except for one question from Mr. Pranay Das. Does this rehabilitation focus on the traumatic experiences of the population, if there is any? Does it also include restorative justice? This was one question that we received from Mr. Pranay Das. Dr. Mal, if you would like to take that up.
The rehab program was geared towards restorative justice, because there was an option to have incarcerated, but within our rehab program, it was not talking about the or criticizing anything anybody had done, because there the Bureau for Commissioner General, who was in charge of the entire rehab, said these individuals have come into rehab. It is not our job to judge and to criticize. Our job is winning hearts and minds to be able to reintegrate and to make Sri Lanka safe. So all the work that was done within rehab was about restoring the relationships and community engagement. So Sri Lanka is not a rich country, and our rehab program didn't have money. So all the programs that were run were by community organizations. They came and they ran the programs, very carefully screened by the Bureau and taken in. They did their work, they left. So it was about helping the beneficiaries to reintegrate with the community. So just imagine suddenly 30 years of suicide bombings in Sri Lanka, massive numbers of people killed on every side. These individuals coming back into the community won't be accepted. But during their period of rehab, schools, the media, everything published the work that they were doing in rehab. There were exhibitions, art exhibitions, all on peace building. So I would get into a cab and I would sometimes ask, so what is happening with the LTT rehab? So ordinary cab guy will explain to me, oh ma'am, they're doing something called rehab. I asked, what is that? Then he explains to me. So there was a level of knowledge built up in the community on rehab. And then he says, my daughter went for an exhibition, art exhibition. It was on peace. And it was done by those people in rehab. So I asked, do you think they're ready to come out? And they say, they probably are.
Sorry for this.
Sorry.
I think we've got a little bit of a disturbance here. Yes, Dr. Mal, please go ahead and we can. Yeah.
So I think one of the values that we had was to have the START program be part of our assessment process. So our rehab assessment process was an independent process. It was not a government process. So I think that was of great benefit because we were able to independently see and be critical about our own program. Had it not been assessed externally, then it's hard for us to sit here and say it has worked. So some of these things are not 100%. It's not 100%, but I think it's important to design and create and think through carefully, but our focus should be on getting individuals back into the community who have been arrested, back into the community as safe people, because they are the only people who can have the legitimacy, in a sense, to counter the ideology as farmers.
Mr. Gurveer, could you please mute yourself? I request the audience to keep your mics muted. There's a little bit of a disturbances that we are getting over here. All right, Dr. Mal, it's been a pleasure listening to you, giving a very comprehensive exposition on this very pertinent topic of radicalization, rehabilitation, and how you have dissected the topic into different dynamics or into different features of radicalization, what goes into counter-radicalization, de-radicalization, as well as the differences between counter and de-radicalization, which is often blurred in the eyes of the public. So you have beautifully explained the intrinsic features of these activities, and also some of your experiences in these countries that in some way or the other have been disturbed by this global phenomenon, which still seems to be very untamed and at the same time still continuing. So I myself have gained a lot from your exposition, and I wish we had more time to go into further discussions. I had a couple of questions pertaining to the models in Saudi Arabia, in Sri Lanka, but then hopefully that our paths get crossed sometime in the near future when we get to the other side of the coronavirus that's engulfing all of us in a very, again, breakneck speed in the last few weeks. Doctor, it's a pleasure to be moderating your session, and I really express my, again, gratitude to you for taking out time to speak to us, and I'm sure the audience have gained immensely out of your deliberation. And also thank my friend Abhinav Pandya for asking me to moderate this very interesting session. I request the entire audience to give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Mal for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Over to you, Abhinav, and we close the session for today. Thank you.